Hello, welcome back to the Scroll Ensemble Classical Music Improvisation channel. Today I'm showing you an interview with Bert Mooiman that I did a few days ago. He's an excellent musician on all keyboards, playing repertoire from the beginning of time until right now, and also a magnificent improviser who has done several projects with us, who also teaches both improvisation and music theory, and is just a very interesting person. His PhD was focused on 19th century improvisation, and of course I'm asking him about that too. If you want to find out more about him, there is a link in the description. There are also a few more bits to the interview that are on Patreon, so feel free to join us there. And of course, if you're liking this approach, leave us a like or subscribe. How does improvisation play a role in your musicianship?
I think improvisation has always played a role in my musicianship, and that started when I started to touch the piano. In fact, I remember very well that I started just by trying to play the instrument and to find nice chords and to play melodies that I enjoyed. And my actual piano lessons started quite late, so I see those first years as a period of improvisation, if you wish, and I still think it has been a very important stage in my development. But more formally, improvisation, I think it especially came into existence when I was playing the organ. I'm a pianist and I'm also an organist, and I've played organ in churches since I was 13 years old. So, and in liturgy, you actually need to improvise. Well, you could do it without, but it's much more practical when you can fill the empty space in liturgy with music of a length that is actually needed and you only know that in the very moment. So during services, I've always improvised, and later I started to do that on the piano as well. I've also played for ballet, I must say, so that's also an environment in which improvisation is important. And finally, I'm also a teacher. I'm teaching at the Royal Conservatoire, music theory mainly, but I soon realized that also in teaching music theory, improvisation can play an important role. It doesn't have to, of course, but improvisation is the field where so many things that you want to teach meet in a very natural way. So I would say that in various ways, improvisation plays a role in my musical life.
How do you practice improvisation?
That's a difficult one. On the one hand, I would tend to say that I don't practice improvisation, but that's not completely true. I don't practice improvisation as I practice, for instance, as I learn a piece. It's just a different type of activity for me, at least. I think I learned a lot in practice. So the liturgy that I talked about was, and still is, an ideal environment. So I also realized at a certain point that I need an audience, if you want to call the church members an audience, the congregation. They're not, in a way, of course. I mean, they're not there to listen to me, but it's a process of participation. So I've always very much felt that I could try out things only in practice. I've always found it very difficult to improvise for myself. And even when I'm teaching improvisation or subjects that are called like that nowadays, I'm very much aware that what I actually teach is maybe certain tools for the players or singers, but not the improvisation itself. I mean the process of getting good ideas, that's something I wouldn't know how to teach that, to be honest.
Right. What kind of tools should we think of when talking?
Yeah, well, it depends, of course, with whom you are working, whether it's a singer or an instrumentalist or a keyboardist. So, speaking for the keyboard, I think this is actually something well established and nothing original. For an organist or for a pianist, it's very important to be able to harmonize melodies on the spot and to harmonize basses and to be familiar with a large number of patterns, structures, sequences, cadences, all those standard formulas that are a part of music making, and being really familiar with them, I believe is of essential value for the real improvisation.
Why do you improvise?
I'm convinced that improvisation should be a part of all music making. So that also when you're playing from a score, it should have some improvisational quality. That means that even if you're playing on basis of a score by some composer, even then you should at least make the impression that you're making the music up yourself at the very moment. It's just like with a good orator. When somebody is delivering a speech, it's the nicest for the audience when they have the feeling that this person is just making it up in that moment. Even if you don't, if you know that he doesn't, still it's the best guarantee for a good communication, I believe. So in that sense, I think that improvisation should be part of all music making. I've always been fascinated, as I told already, about improvisation, and have always been, well, especially since I started teaching, which is already some 20 years ago, I realized how important it in fact is. It's very common to hear people saying or claiming that improvisation in classical music kind of died in the 19th century. And for a classical musician, especially for a pianist like me, the 19th century is central to the repertoire you are playing. So I was fascinated by that, and I also knew that it couldn't be true, at least not completely, because one of the most famous improvisers in history was Franz Liszt, who was also famous for improvising during piano recitals halfway through the 19th century. So it cannot be that simple. So it became actually a very wide project. And basically I investigated two tracks. One of them is what did exist in the field of what we would most usually call improvisation, namely making up new pieces in the moment. So what did they do, and how can we try to imitate such a thing if we would like to do so? And the other one was, in fact, more important for me as a musician. The question, how can we make our performances on basis of scores more improvisatory? And connected to that, can I show that during the 19th century the way of performing was indeed more improvisatory as well? And I think I found some evidence for that, and evidence that kind of guides us when we want to do something similar today, without claiming that, or without claiming authenticity in the sense of doing exactly the same as it happened back then. I think in descriptions it's very hard to find direct evidence, in the sense that we find a description like this and this person, it's as if he is improvising. rather the contrary, I would say. So what we do find is comments on the concepts of Werktreue that you were referring to. Clara Schumann is another example. I think what I've found is mainly circumstantial evidence. So, for instance, Clara Schumann, the widow of Robert Schumann, she was one of the most important pianists in Germany at her time. She was famous for the concept, or at least she's associated nowadays with the concept of Werktreue. She was famous for being true to the score, so that means that apparently other pianists were not so true to the score, but she was. So it's easy to think today that, well, what Clara Schumann was doing must have been something like what we like to do, namely think of historically informed music making, trying to be as precise as we can in performing from the score. Now, we don't have recordings of Clara Schumann, unfortunately, but we do have some recordings of her students. And she was a very firm teacher, also a very successful teacher. So we may assume that when we listen to those students, we hear something that is maybe not too far removed from her ideals. When you listen to those students, at the first time you hear them, you might be very, very surprised, because those people were playing, for instance, works of Brahms or Schumann. Well, Brahms was still living when they were having their lessons with Clara Schumann. They even often knew Brahms. He visited them. For them, he was like a god. So you would expect, if the concept of Werktreue is so strong, that they would try to be as strict to those scores as they could. Maybe they were in their minds, but to us, they are extremely free in their performances of Brahms. So, in that sense, I think Clara Schumann can count also as an example. On top of that, we do have some methods. For instance, halfway through the 19th century is a violin method by Pierre Baillot, who explicitly mentions the word improvisation in the sense of being free with the score. He actually basically says the score gives the caractère, as he calls it, so it gives the frame, the character of the piece, but it needs the genius or the inspiration or the how does he call it, the accent of the musician, to bring it to life, and it was seen clearly as something that should be put upon this character. So there were two things: there was the score, and on the other hand, there was the musician who brought the music to life. Improvisation is and should be fun. Well, actually, all music making should be fun, I believe.
Thank you so much, Bert.
You're welcome.
For this wonderful conversation.